Hi, this is conducting a chi-squared test of independence. My name is Robert Michael Paisley, and this is GRC 605, and professor is Professor Ming Long, and this is for California Intercontinental School. The agenda for this presentation, we will be using PSPP to do a chi-square independence test. We will look at the variables that are included in this test, and then we'll use the PSPP program to give a test result and how Cramer's V shows that there is a correlation within those variables. In our first test, we'll be looking at the rows and columns of numbers cars and numbers defaults. The second test, we will be using rows and columns in lit comfort and numbers default. And the third test will be numbers cars and lit comfort. So here we'll take a look at the chi-squared test of independence and give a little definition. It is used to find out if there is any relationship between the variables that are asked about. With this test, we'll state the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. And the null hypothesis of the chi-squared test of independence states that there is no relationship between the two variables. And the alternative hypothesis states that there is a relationship between the two variables. In our first chi-squared test of numbers cars and number defaults, we looked at the data and we imported it into PSPP, and it gave us a chi-square of over to your right here, a value of 6.68 and a differential of 6 and a p equals 0.351 with a number of valid cases 150. And Cramer's V showed the relationship as a 0.15, which is very weak. So in our first hypothesis test, the following correlation test was conducted with a null hypothesis that there is no relationship between numbers cars and numbers defaults, and an alternative hypothesis that there is a relationship between numbers cars and number defaults. The chi-square test and its p-value were conducted using PSPP, assuming that alpha equals 0.05, and there was no relationship emerged in the formula showing that the differential was 6 out of 150 tests, and it equaled 6.68 with a p-value of 0.351. And so the Cramer's V showed a very weak result, so there was no significant result found. Here in our second test, we can see that the rows was the light comfort and the columns was number defaults, and we imported that again into PSPP. And on the left hand side you can see the data that was imported. On the right hand side, as you can see, that the chi-squared was 6.68 and the degrees of freedom was 6 with a p-value of 0.351, and the Cramer's V was shown to be a 0.15. So for our second hypothesis test here, we had the same null hypothesis, but there was a relationship between that, no relationship between light comfort and number defaults. And our alternative hypothesis is that there is a relationship between these two variables, light comfort and number default. In the chi-square statistics, and its p-value were calculated using PSPP, assuming alpha equals 0.05, and that there is no relationship emerged because the variable squared was with a degrees freedom of 6, and out of 150 and we saw a chi-square value of 6.68 with a p-value of 0.351, so no significant result was found in this test. And so in our third test here, we imported the data again in PSPP. The rows and columns was numbers, cars, and light comfort. And on the left-hand side, you can see our summary and what our imported data was. And on the right-hand side, you can see that our chi-square value was 450 with a degrees of freedom of 9 and our p-value of 0. And once we got that p-value of 0, you can see our Cramer's V value was a 1, which is shows a very strong, significant value. In our third hypothesis test, the following correlation was conducted with a null hypothesis of there is no relationship between the numbers, cars, and light comfort, or an alternative hypothesis that there is a relationship between numbers, cars, and light comfort. The chi-square statistics and its p-value were calculated using PSPP, assuming that alpha equals 0.05. A relationship emerged with a degrees of freedom of 9 and the number of 150 of the, and so we had a chi-square value of 450 with a p-value of 0. And so in this 0, we were able to use Cramer's V to show that relationship, and it equaled a 1. So Cramer's V indicated a very strong relationship between the two. So in this sample, we have a significant result found. So our main takeaways with this presentation, we were able to use the software PSPP and import the data, and then take two variables that is in that data and find the chi-square of that data that was presented. And so in that data, we were able to use our null and alternative hypothesis and find out if there was a relationship based on the chi-squared formula, and if it showed a relationship, we used the Cramer's V to show how strong that relationship was. And so we used that data to show the p-value if it was less than a, and if a is equal to 0.05, and determine if we should use Cramer's V to show how strong our relationship is between the two variables. Again, this is Robert Michael Paisley, and I appreciate you looking at my video, and thanks for watching. And if there are any questions, please email me or give some notes and feedback into our discussion. Thank you.